You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Leanne Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their primal power and actualize their deepest gifts. If you're feeling ready to go deeper with myself and Jonathan, go to primalhappiness.co/go deeper or book a free exploration call with one of us at primalhappiness.co/exploration. And just to let you know, we have a brand new offering that we're in the throes of creating right now. It's called Waking the Wild Sovereign, and it's very much the pinnacle of our work. It's the deepest, most intimate, and most impactful way that you can work with us. We'll be sharing more on that very soon. And now onto this week's show. It's with my great friend, Adam Quiney. Adam is an executive leadership coach specializing in working with the smartest people in the room. A former software developer and attorney, Adam's learned the hard way about the costs that come from keeping your heart safe and chasing after external rewards to feel whole and complete. From love, Adam is connection, passion, presence, wit, and brilliance. From fear, he is awkward, robotic, apathetic, irrelevant, and arrogant. He's learned to embrace all these parts of himself and works with others to do the same in their own lives. He's a man on a mission to bring the world to a more inspired and fully expressed place. In this episode, Adam and I dive deep into a conversation around standing and being a leader in our relationships, and that includes friendships, romantic relationships, you name it. What that looks like, how it relates to being vulnerable. It's all about being vulnerable, really. How blooming difficult it can be, and why it's even a game worth playing. We'll also share some of our own recent screw-ups and successes, which are possibly the same thing. And wow, this was a really rich and spontaneous conversation. It was very much Adam and I exploring as we went. So if you're someone interested in the deepest aspects of leadership and growth, I am sure you'll dig it. Let's dive in. Hello, Adam Quiney. Welcome to the show, or welcome back to the show.
Hello, it's the hat trick.
It's actually, I think, is it the hat trick?
I think my head is the third time.
Oh, is it?
You're just sort of thinking ahead. You're getting excited about time number 4. That's going to be the really good one. This is like the filler we're going to do.
The next one's going to be awesome.
Stay tuned for that one, guys. This is...
Yeah. This is just a necessary evil to get us to the...
That's right, yeah.
That's really weird. I really had thought this was number 4. Well, I think you're already in rarefied air to be a hat trick anyway. So I'm sorry to take away the thunder and the glory of that moment, but yes, this is...
It does feel very special.
It is very special.
Yeah.
So we are talking about a topic that I think we kind of talk about a lot back and forth between the two of us around being a coach and a leader kind of in life, in relationships, but particularly around something I think that's a little bit rarer maybe, which is allowing us to be made a difference to be impactable. And I know this is something that's been particularly alive for you. And so I wonder if you could just give a bit of a background on, like, perhaps distill it a bit better than I just have, but then also just give a bit of a backdrop of kind of why this is particularly live, and then we're going to just see what comes up.
It's so unfortunate that people can't see the myriad of hand gestures that you make use of. They have no idea how much you're working in the background.
I thought my see what comes up gesture was.
Oh boy, this is a half-hour podcast of us laughing at each other. Okay. Yes. So, well, I'm actually just distinguishing this in this moment, but I think, and then I'll tie it back to what's live for me. But I think I don't think this is why I got into coaching, but I think it's part of how I learned to overcome my fear that naturally lends itself to the career I've chosen, which is coaching. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Before I say more, I want to make sure I don't make it too complicated.
Say it again. I think I got it, but I think it's easy to miss what I think you meant.
Yeah. So there's a strategy I learned to use in my life to overcome what I'm afraid of. Mm-hmm. And that strategy naturally makes me a good fit for coaching. Mm-hmm. And that strategy is like, I got to get all the work done over here. I got to get it all handled so that I don't need anyone, because I can't rely on anyone. And so that I don't end up being a hypocrite and people don't be like, by the way, Adam, here's this big glaring blind spot you have. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, oh my God, I suck. And so.
Yeah. Can I just say, me too?
Please.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. You and I have talked a little bit, supported each other even on this. And so for the longest while, I think there's been a lot of good that's come out of that, but there's also always been this, it's just like our edge, right? It gets us as far as we can get. And then there's time for a new thing. And that particular edge has really been showing up a lot in my life lately, which is, I can see a lot over here, and that's limited because I'm naturally going to have blind spots. And as much as I'd like to not have anyone be able to reflect those to me, that kind of works in a coach-client relationship, because I have my coach and my job with my client is to reflect their stuff to them and to sort of be entirely out of the space. But with friends, that's completely starting to cause, it's creating limitations in my friendships. Mm. I can say more, but I want to give you a chance to like help me be more clear if you see there an opportunity for that.
What I was just thinking is, I don't think this necessarily helps you be more clear, but I was just thinking, I think, and I know I was just sharing with you that I know that a lot of the listeners to my show are probably similar to us in that way. There's certainly a whole bunch of kind of coaches, change workers, therapists, or just people who have done a lot of work, have reached a level of consciousness where they've probably gone down that path for very similar reasons to what you were just sharing. So I was just thinking, it's interesting that there's something quite paradoxical almost, where we know that we have to like make ourselves vulnerable to having those reflections. So we'll seek out coaches, for example, or opportunities to do that work. But it's very like isolated to it's kind of like, I'll do it here and then nowhere else. And I was just really present. So that's really interesting, isn't it? Like it requires that of you, but then it's very easy to make that very like, it's only going to be allowed to show up here and not anywhere else.
Totally. Like one of the things I've seen myself, the universe is being very generous, which means it's being a bit of a dickhead, which means that I'm getting a lot of opportunity to see this stuff lately, presumably because I'm ready for the breakthrough. That's what's there for me. And I'm committed to it. And so I'm getting a lot of opportunities to see this. And one of the things I'm very like a thing I hear myself say a lot is like, oh, I will take this and work on it with my coach. So it's like, oh, thanks for what you said over there. Now the conversation's over. You cannot make any more of a difference. Now I go over here and sort it out. And then I'll come back to you clean and shiny, having resolved this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
would you actually say that out loud? Or would you internally say that?
I would, well, not all of that, but I would say, if someone, I mean, like, wow, it takes forever for Adam to say anything.
I meant I'll take that and work on that with my coach. Would you say that out loud?
Yes, I would. Yeah, I would. Like if someone was like, you're really, there's probably many different ways I would say it, but they'd have some complaint or, be reflecting something that I'd done. And I'd be like, okay, well, look, I'm not sure exactly how I'd word it, but it'd be very slick. And the wording would ultimately convey, thank you. I've got this. Don't you worry. And it's kind of like vulnerability. So like that vulnerability that's very polished and like, we're like, yeah, what you're doing is all of the doing of vulnerability and you don't feel vulnerable right now. And that's kind of how I would be about that particular kind of thing.
Yeah. I was just thinking, I can think of so many places that I can be like that actually, not just that one thing. Yeah. There's a kind of the doing of vulnerability is a great illusion to get caught up in, that you are, I'm so being vulnerable. Look at all this vulnerability that I'm doing here.
I think that's like probably a good diagnostic for me and perhaps like a lot of us is anytime because one of the things I don't often think when I'm really being vulnerable is, well, I'm really being vulnerable. It's more like I really have to pee or this conversation should end immediately or, stuff like that.
Yeah.
As soon as that word starts to show up in my thinking, that might be a good diagnostic for me. Like, probably something deeper for you, Adam.
Yeah. We had exactly the same thought at the same time. I was just thinking, it's the times where I'm kind of like, I'm being so vulnerable here, but I'm actually definitely not. That makes so much sense. Yeah. Normally it's the times where I had a really kind of minor example of this a couple of nights ago, but it's just sprung to mind where one of the women who's joining Wake the Wild Feminine had a question that was kind of verging on, not a complaint. I mean, it was a completely valid question, but it was just like, there was definitely like an edge there for me where it could be received as a bit of kind of like, oh no, this is going to happen. I'm not going to like this. That was kind of like where her...
A little bit pokey. Yeah.
And I noticed in that moment, I could either kind of like, it's cool, I'm all over this. No, it's fine. There's no problem with what you're saying because actually we're going to do is this. And that was a kind of... that would have been a really like easy response. And I could have done that in a really nice sort of vulnerable, soft way when what I actually did was actually like, this isn't like the most challenging example ever. It just popped into my mind is like, what I actually did was just very open. Like, I actually don't know quite what she's saying and whether I do have it covered. I'm just going to ask. And that in itself required me to be vulnerable, like not dive in there and say like, it's cool, I've got this handle. But like, can you just say a little bit more about what you're actually concerned about? Like, what is it you're worried that is going to be asked of you? And like left open the space, like actually it could be that when she gives me more information, I haven't got it. There could be a gap here. There could be, things that are going to go wrong. And that like, it's a minor example, but that really is being vulnerable versus like me talking in a vulnerable way, which is again doing vulnerability.
Yeah, and there's a degree of control to that. Like, oh, thanks, I had like the slickness to it. Whereas, in your example, and I was thinking of some examples in my own life. There's kind of like a diving all the way in, like where you're just really, one of the things that's been there for me lately is I make a mess because I'm a human, and what there is to do is to really get present to the impact of how I've been, which requires standing with someone and saying, what's the impact of this? And letting them share that without me kind of sanitizing it or apologizing for it or anything, like other than just receiving it and really getting like, man, that sucks. And feeling that. And that's a really deep dive, like it's hard. You can't control that. And it's really opening ourselves up to being hit. And I can take that from my coach, because as you said, we've designated them as that person, and my coach, frankly, is a safer space because they're very artful and we have that relationship. With my friends, it's much more frightening.
Yeah, it really is. There was something there about I think you said the word descent, and I was just thinking that really felt alive to me. The way that you're like willingly stepping into deeper and deeper like levels of intimacy and reveal. Like you don't know. The more we go into that descent, the more they may reveal that it's going to be harder and harder for us to be in relationship to.
Yeah. Can I share a story that happened just yesterday? Is the story time acceptable?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, of course, dummy. Got it. They can't see your eyebrows. I got mean there. I'd gone for dinner with two friends on, Thursday. And afterwards, the next day, one of them reached out and shared, "Hey, can I give you some feedback?" Which is really exciting and really scary. It was scary because of the feedback.
Like literally, as you say that, I can feel like the fear rise in my body. Like, oh,
yeah. And it's rare that our friends are like, "Hey, can I give you some feedback? You're super cool. All right, see you later."
Totally.
Any of my friends that are listening to this, feel free to do that. And I was excited because this isn't normally how that relationship has gone. We just sort of operate over top of that stuff, or whatever, time heals all, that kind of conversation. And my friend shared like, I felt like you dominated the conversation, interrupted to make jokes, and it was funny, but at the same time, like you really took over the conversation. I don't know if you're aware of that, which I'm not in the moment. I know I have that capacity and I can be that way, but in the moment I cannot see it. It's in my blind spot. And so I was like, oh my God, this sucks. Had to really bring some compassion to myself. But then we met up.
Can I just?
Yeah, please.
Understand. Was he saying that that's a one-off that you did, or that's a tendency that you have, or both?
More so the one-off. Well, he was just giving me feedback on that lunch or that dinner or whatever that we'd had. And I can see as much of that. Like, I do have that tendency to kind of dominate, take over the thing.
He was the one-off, but you were connecting the dots of like, actually, this is my tendency.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we got together for lunch yesterday because I really wanted to clean up, and I was excited. Like, wow, there's an opportunity for us to deepen. And thanks again, universe, for giving me one more place to do this. But what there was for me to do was really get the impact and have him share all of that, which was tough for him. And I think we often don't realize that. It's hard for people to honestly share the impact.
Yeah.
And like one of the pieces of impact he had is like, there's this point I reach where I just want to be like, shut up, Adam. And then he felt really bad for sharing that. And I was like, oh man, that's the impact I'm having. That's the thing that is in my blind spot. I don't intend to create that, but until I can distinguish it, I have no access to it.
Totally.
And so, yeah.
Wow. Gosh, that's like so much courage actually from both of you needed to take part in a conversation. Like, it's so easy to think that courage is only needed for those kind of, like big things that we're going to go like, look at me, everyone. But actually it's in those like really icky conversations that it's like most needed. And I really respect that. Like, wow. Both of you. And like you say, we can think it's the person that's giving the feedback, like it's easy for them, but like it so isn't. I actually find it harder to be that person than the person getting the feedback. Although, to be honest, it's not much of a choice.
I've started to. So how this is unfolding for me is, first I'm getting clear, like, what I'm committed to being is the clearing for this kind of feedback to happen. Like, I want relationships in the world where this is how we interact with each other, where we're like, hey, that thing happened and it left me feeling this way. And then the other person's like, wow, oh my God. And we get to like build together from that place. Wow. And I'm learning
just to really acknowledge you for that, because that in itself is like the opposite of what most people are seeking to create, especially us Brits.
Well, us Canadians too, we would just apologize politely and then make a joke.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you, but like that is on its own is pretty wow.
Thank you. And the thing, just to make sure I'm immediately de-pedestaled, I received that. And I'm just noticing, wow, I think it's really taken me 40 years to develop myself enough that I'm now ready to be that clearing. Because before, obviously what I want is to give everyone around me the feedback I have for them. That's what we all want, right? Listen to what I have to say. I have to, if I really want to be the clearing for all of that, then I'm going to be receiving a lot of it. And I'm getting clear, like, wow, it's taken me 40 years and a lot of deep work to get to the point where I'm now ready and strong enough and able to start to receive that. And that doesn't mean everyone needs to take 40 years or that they have to be strong enough, but to be the clearing for something is a humbling and challenging thing. That's how I'm feeling now.
Totally. What just occurred to me was, I feel like none of this can happen in isolation. Like you were saying, it would be nice. You said something, this is really paraphrasing, but kind of, it'd be nice to think that it's all you being able to give feedback out there, but it kind of has to include that. I think that's part of the clearing, that this is always going to be two-way. And so you can model giving that. And also it kind of then sets that's like, that's tone of our relationship. And I was just thinking, going back to what we were saying about, it's not easy on either side of that table, whether you're the one giving or receiving it. And you supported me through something that was the other way around recently, involving someone close to me, where they'd done something unintentionally that, did impact me, upset me. And my kind of default would be to just suck it up, kind of get resolved on that on my own. And then kind of come back to once again, like you were saying, kind of come back nice and shiny. And not even having said I'm going to go sort of do the work on it, just like do the work on it, come back nice and shiny and like, yeah, I've got this.
It's great. It's kind of like it's the other flavor of Teflon, isn't it? One is you get feedback and you're like, don't worry, I'll handle it. The other one is you get tweaked and have maybe feedback for the other person and don't worry, I'll handle it. And then I won't. Yeah. Anyhow, please.
And you supported me in firstly, just allowing myself to have the feelings, but that's okay. These are the feelings I've got. That's okay. I can just allow myself to have those feelings before going straight to fixing them. And to actually share, they were mixed. I had some upset, but I also had a lot of the particular thing the person had done was share some news that was something to be happy about. And so I had that. There was a real mixture of feelings going on in me, and then guilt that I felt like I should just be feeling happy, and I'm not. I'm feeling upset. So there's kind of guilt, upset, and happiness. And to be able to kind of hold all of that and then share, this was the impact. I have got all of this going on. I didn't share the guilt part, but I was there is some upset here, but I'm also, I'm really happy for you too. And that again, it wasn't the norm for me to share something which I knew was going to be tough for that other person to receive, to hear that they'd upset me. That is not the norm for me to say to someone, you've upset me. And it was, I think it's the times that we're willing to step into that unknown. Really, that's what we're talking about. It's I don't know what's going to be created from the space of me sharing that. Yeah. What was created was actually gorgeous. There was a real kind of deepening connection. As I suspected, it was totally unintentional. So the person apologized, and it was just gorgeous. But what I really hope, going back to kind of the reason I've said this, is every time we choose into that, we're creating that kind of clearing. This is how our relationship is being formed, moment to moment, where it's okay for us to share what's going on, share the impact we're making on each other, create something together each moment from a place of unknown. And it's being willing to do that. We're creating an invitation for them to do the same to us, and us hopefully be okay to receive it, which is going back to what
a lot of self-trust in that, it's a lot of trust both sides of the fence. I can trust that I am strong enough to receive this feedback without being destroyed. And I can trust that they are strong enough to receive whatever feedback there is without me needing to manage them and prevent them from breaking in half. And one of the things, you mentioned there was about like intent. Obviously it wasn't her intention, his, her, whoever it wasn't their intention. And I see that as often one of the things that gets in the way of us owning our impact is that we're like, well, that wasn't my intention. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like that's great. But the only real reason we would need to put our attention on our intention is if we're making something wrong. It's like, oh, I didn't mean to hit your car. I didn't mean to T-bone you at that intersection. And yet there's an impact that I have to be responsible for and clean up the mess that I've made. And that's a tricky one, to let go of that and to release this idea of, oh, it's right how I was. I didn't intend it, therefore I don't have to. Like, no, that's just a smaller game, and not one that I don't think one that you're committed to playing.
Yeah, no, I love that. So where do you feel that would be an interesting place to take this next? So what's something, just to drop in, something you and I have also been talking about, which I think links to this, is about kind of being in discovery in life. So kind of not hearing an idea and kind of like, oh yeah, I know where I do that, and that. But actually being in discovery. And I think the way that I'm seeing this links is, in that example, is by being willing to kind of step into the unknown of this intimacy, that you get to discover these things, but it has to be the willingness to kind of be in the unknown. But I'd love to know what you've been spending a lot more time with this than I have. So I'd love to know what's showing up for you on that.
Let's talk about discovery first. And, before you even started recording, you were speaking of the fact that now the way our relationship works is you send me off to courses in Cancun and then come back and talk about it. And you get now we're doing that for the audience too. It's cool. So discovery is a distinction.
No, go to Cancun. Adam's got it covered.
I got it covered. I'll go to the beaches. Discovery is a Werner Erhard distinction. And the idea is that it's like when we get asked a question and we already have the answer ready. Like, oh, what is it that how do you let people down, Adam? And I'm like, oh, I already know all these ways I let people down. Great. That's not discovery. Discovery is literally a discovery. You have to look without knowing the answer and discover something. So that's the context for this idea that we're talking about. Like, and I think it ties in quite beautifully.
Can I just, sorry to interrupt, please, just to give you the, I think, further distinction. I guess is kind of the deeper link here, kind of why would you even want to live that way? And I think I asked you something like that and you're just like, well, it's just like the being of leadership. It's just like, there's no like nice, neat answer. It's just like the being of leadership is to be in that way of discovery. You said something like that. I mean, feel free to explain that better than I just have, if you want.
I would not say, well, I would veer away from it's just the being of leadership. But I think if we already know the answer to something, there's nothing new to come from that inquiry. So if I ask you, hey, why don't you look into this area of your life? And you're like, I already know, blah, 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 blah. Well, literally nothing new could possibly come from that because you already know the answer. So there's, the reason we would be looking from a place of discovery is because we're going to discover something, we're going to encounter something new. And from that newness, there's an opportunity for things to go differently. So I don't know that I would necessarily say like, do it because it's leader, dummy.
As I would said to me, but okay.
Well, I'm meaner to you, Leanne.
not our listeners. Okay, got it.
but really, because it makes available something new that wasn't there before, and that's what allows for transformation in our lives as leaders, et cetera, et cetera. Does that tie that up? That part?
Mm-hmm.
So when we're willing to be present to the impact, I already know, I mean, I can see this, again, I'm seeing this kind of in the moment, the stuff where I'm like, I got it, blah, 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 I'm good. There's no opportunity for me to really discover something. Like my friend's like, hey, you dominated the conversation. Oh, I totally know I do that. Thank you for putting that in front of me. I'm not going to discover anything new. I'm just going to operate with the stuff I already know. And the opportunity in talking to someone and really letting them share this truth or whatever is there for us is we might discover something new. And just like any kind of discovery, you don't know how that's going to feel. You don't know what the impact on you of discovering something new is going to be because it's undiscovered at this point.
Yeah, that's true vulnerability, isn't it? It's just that Yeah, that's like a whole nother level. I'm glad I brought this in. So
yeah, it's very smart of you.
So going back, if you don't mind using that conversation with your friend as the example there, I think there was a way you could have been in that conversation where you were doing exactly that, kind of like, oh yeah, I've got that. I know that that's a tendency of mine. I can see how that was showing up there. Apologize for it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Which still would have been, I feel like that's already a kind of level of, you are creating a clearing where it's okay to have feedback and for people to give that to you. And so it's not making that wrong at all. And possibly that we kind of have to journey through that willingness to be there first, maybe, I don't know. But I think looking at it through this lens of discovery, in fact, you talk about how you receive that from the lens of a discovery.
First, I'm going to tie this into leadership too. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the most toxic ways leaders can show up is when they're like, oh, I call it being closed under the guise of being open. Mm-hmm. So these are the leaders that are like super open to feedback, whatever you got, and you give them the feedback and they're like, oh yeah, totally. I know we're working on that, blah, blah, blah. You're like, that didn't land. And so we can give your quote open to our feedback, but who cares? It makes no difference. You're not really open to discovering anything new. And what that creates is it's really poisonous because the leader is left thinking that they're super open. The team underneath them becomes more and more resigned and disenfranchised and disillusioned in that person's leadership. And eventually it all falls apart, but usually in a under the surface, sneaky, toxic, poisonous kind of way. Mm-hmm. So that drop that bomb there. We're having fun.
That was over to Adam's right, just in case. Okay.
So one of the things I really discovered with my friend, that's kind of the conversation we're in, right? Like, what did I discover from that?
Well, I think also just to back up slightly, maybe this is over-egging it, but I don't know, because I think this is stuff that we don't talk about much in life and even in leadership. So just like, what did that look like or feel like moment to moment, like being a discovery in that conversation versus like, oh yeah, I've got that. I can see that's a tendency, like I would just like you to share a little bit about kind of how that sounded.
Yeah, the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. The first thing I noticed was I wanted to delay the conversation. And like, I was like, oh, we're in a busy space. And then I don't know how my friend is going to feel about so now I'm managing him so as to delay the conversation that's edgy for me. Mm-hmm. So that's the first part. Just those are the sort of fears that were showing up. And then the experience for me is one of feeling like I'm going to receive a punch and then needing to relax, like to actually open. And I don't know if this is what it's like. And you used to box, I think, right? Or kickbox or something. I don't know if that's maybe you're always tense, but my sense is you want to have a degree of fluidity and relaxation. Because if we're always tensing, ready for the blow, then nothing can get in and we're restricted.
Sure. Yes. Sorry, just to say, I love that you brought that up, because I was just thinking how, maybe this is taking it. No, I don't think it is. I think it's so directly related. We'll see.
Let's find out. We'll discover. Yeah.
As you were talking then, I was just thinking, this is so why those of us who have simultaneously alongside perhaps more like, mental based work have also done embodiment work is so linked, because you have that capacity to recognize those times where you're holding yourself tight and then allow yourself to relax and open in those moments where everything you want to go, close up, ready to flow, when actually the place you really is going to be most helpful, most useful, most creative is to be able to be open to it. And I don't know if is there a way of like mentaling yourself there? I don't know, but certainly I found the best way, the most effective way is to have that skill in your body to be able to open when it seems like the most unlikely thing to do.
I have two things that I think are like, these are like tips. We're giving tips. Take note, everyone. Tips.
Free tips.
The first, so one, most of us, myself at least, I have this idea like I can be with it all. Well, that just makes it hard for me to see when I can't be with it. Mm-hmm. So one is being able to distinguish, well, I'm tense right now. And then the access point I find most available usually is my breath. Mm-hmm. Like, can I deepen my breath and drop my shoulders back? Mm-hmm. And that is it's not the whole battle, but it's the starting point. And if you can do that, the rest of the stuff starts to fall in place behind it. The other thing as you were talking that came to me is, as we're tensing, like humans are just we have mirror neurons. We're incredibly present without realizing it to what's going on over on the other side of the table. And so much of our own physiology and thinking is a function of what we see in front of us. Mm. And so if I'm tensing and waiting for the punch, my friend is now going to be like tense himself, and he's going to feel me waiting for the punch. And so then he has a harder time giving feedback. And so it's like another one of those places where it sounds easy. Oh, I'll just be the clearing for people to give me this feedback, but it requires a lot to really unload and, okay, I'm going to let this guy give me what he has to give me and be with it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm glad we took that little segue. Carry on.
Yeah. There's one more piece that I'll share, which is that as I was receiving that, it felt, my experience was sadness, embarrassment, and shame. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't want to leave my friends with an experience of like me taking up the space. I don't want me to be creating this shut up Adam in the space. Mm-hmm. And on some level, there's still a part of me that like wraps itself around this idea that that's wrong, how I showed up. And I think that's okay. You know, I have to let that stuff come up in order to let it go. And so that's part of the gift in this discovery is like, ooh, that's pokey for me. And now I can start to work on it. Now that I've allowed myself to discover that's part of the impact.
Yeah. And so I had two things going on. One, I was just thinking about like, oh, wow, I can really see how you've been willing to be open to discover created those feelings in you, which aren't really feelings that clearly you're looking for. And yet I think we probably do need to, I was about to think, so I was thinking that, then I was thinking, probably need to give like a reason why all of this is worth doing, like putting yourself through, like ending on a kind of, on some goals. Yeah. And then I was also thinking of a recent experience of mine and thinking like, can I anonymize it enough to be able to share it? So that's what everything, if you saw me, I had all that going on. So yeah, I think there's so much there, which it's what you were just saying there about making wrong. It's such a human tendency, isn't it, to kind of like allow ourselves to like see it and then like, oh God, I can only be in relationship with it by making this wrong and then beating myself up for it. So I'd love you to say a bit about that, because I think that's a really important part of being able to kind of like hold the entirety of this way of being. I think that's a really necessary part of it. Isn't making yourself wrong, by the way, not making yourself wrong.
So the simplest, it's kind of like, why do this? And more or less, right? Do I have that right? So the simplest reason is because I'm committed to deeper relationships. So often we go for good enough in our lives. We're like, it's good enough, in which case, great. You don't need to, if things are good enough, you don't need to, there's nothing you need to do. None of this is a need to do. I have a real yearning and craving for deeper relationships. Like you and I have been creating that in our friendship. I've got another friend that I am actively creating something deeper with. And it's so rewarding and rich. And it's allowing things to show up in my life that would not be possible absent the influence that, whoa, that word was tough for me to say. The influence and impact of you and other friends in my life. And so that's why I think it makes something much deeper and richer available when we're willing to be with all of it. Because that's the nature of a friendship or any relationship, is that there's all of this stuff present. Most of the time we just aren't conscious to it and operate over top of it.
Yeah. Yes, that's such a lovely way of putting it. I was just thinking how I think in your work, you typically refer to it more as survival mechanism. In the kind of depth psychology, like Jung is referred to as shadow. But I think there's a point we get to where we realize there's this stuff that's just, we are only ever going to be able to operate over the top of it. It's not going to go anywhere. It's still going to influence us. And then we become more and more willing to kind of take a look there, because we know that that's going to kind of, fuel our expansion. And I was thinking, oh yeah, but I think it's another like place. I mean, ultimately it's all still us, but I think what you're saying here is like the same's true for our relationships. There's this stuff that's there in shadow that we can either kind of like keep operating over the top of, but that only then allows this kind of like shallower level of friendship, relationship, or we can be willing to like dive down there and take a look, which is hard because we're in shadow, and yet it creates that depth.
Yes.
I don't know why maybe I've just said something that's really obvious, but that just felt quite new to me. Did I just say something really obvious?
I that's not how it occurred to me.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like one of those things, like when you see it, it seems really obvious, but it's just never occurred to me quite like that before.
Yeah. Most of this stuff, I think, simple and obvious. It's like, oh, well, obviously what there is to do is to let someone share with you the blah, 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 blah. So hard. Like, it's challenging. It demands something of us to allow this stuff to happen. And then we reap all of these amazing benefits from us. And we're like, well, that was obvious. Why wasn't I doing that all along? Like, it took me 40 years to get here.
I just want to, we're almost out of time, aren't we? It's flown by. I just want to share an example I've had recently where, and I must admit, this is just one example, but I keep seeing this over and over again. The more willing I am to go into those kind of shadowy, icky parts, whilst there is, like, for example, like shame, hurt, those kind of emotions, like what I also find is the rewards come really quickly too. And so I had an example recently, which I shared with you, where a friend and I were having, it's a too long a story to actually go into the ins and outs of it, but I'd upset her. She'd shared with me that she'd upset me. I'd upset her. I was then kind of trying to like connect and sort of deepen into it. And then I kind of felt a bit like, I kind of passed the ball to you and you just dropped it. And it was, again, a kind of like me sort of changing my default would be like, I'm just going to like make myself okay with it over here and then kind of re-enter the conversation. And I didn't. I kind of just shared with her how that felt, and also shared that we'd had a previous conversation that we wanted to create more depth in our relationship. And it's kind of like, this is a place that we could be up to creating depth, and you've chosen to walk away from it. Like, that's not the work of creating depth, walking away from a place to create depth. And it was like, like that was really hard for me to be in that risk and that kind of like, I don't know what she could be really upset, really walk away from this at this point. I really did feel that this could be we could lose our friendship here. And yet what came back was the opposite. It did create more depth. It did create more love, but it always amazes me how quickly that seems to come. Like, you get the rewards. Like, I think just the feeling of being deep with someone, even when it has like pain and hurt, just that feeling of depth in itself is so rewarding.
It's amazing. Yeah, it is very, not always. Sometimes there's like a journey we're on, right? Like we swing once and then that created a bigger mess and then we work through that.
Yeah, in fact, my example was quite like that. There was a kind of what happened there? Like, this isn't well.
The thing that I'm really present to, and I know we're tight on time, so I'll let this be the last thing I'll say, is I'm discovering more and more, if we're willing to stay in the conversation with each other and really have it be a conversation, everything can be moved through. And if we're not, then it can't. And so that's the beauty in all of this. If we're willing to stay in the conversation with each other, magic can happen.
Yeah, I love that. And there's, I guess, that that is the, like, if there's a theme here, I guess that's the bigger work, isn't it? It's like being able to be vulnerable to this creation, to be in discovery of, like, you may not get the immediate answer or the immediate win, but if you're willing to keep stepping up to that, like, okay, this is scary, but I'm going to keep being willing to be vulnerable to what's going to be created here. Like, the gold will come.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. I feel like there's just so much more we could say. I can't believe how fast this has gone, but
maybe this is a two-parter.
Yeah.
We've got to fill that 4th show spot now.
Oh, of course. We've
planted that. So
we've got to get to the good stuff. But yeah, for now, wonderful. Thank you. I feel like I've just created so much that I'm now oh my God, there's this and there's this. But yeah, for now, we're done. So if people would like to find out more about you and all the you create so much, I know you've got a podcast like this and all sorts of other things. Where can they find all this?
Well, let me see. My website, adamquiney.com, just my full name, has all of my stuff. Follow me on Facebook, reach out on Facebook. Every Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, I do a live coaching show where we coach someone and then break down what happened, which I believe a special celebrity guest, Brook-Tyler, will be there at some point.
Yeah.
So we're going to have that set up. And then the last thing is my podcast.
That's a great example of me making myself vulnerable.
Totally. Yeah. I'm excited to just lean into your forehead with my elbow. And then the last thing is I do have a podcast. It's called Get Lit by Adam Quiney, and it's usually 10 to 20 minutes and some distinction about leadership every week. So discovery, the foundation for speaking as a leader, why the thing that's right is actually what's wrong, et cetera, et cetera. So any of those places, you can find me.
Gorgeous. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Thanks, Leanne.
So we certainly went some places there. For those of us who are committed to our growth and doing our work, it can be paradoxically extra challenging to be vulnerable enough to allow other people to make a difference for us. Our tendency can be to take any feedback and then find a way to provide an invulnerable, often glossy or professional response, which of course isn't really doing our work or fueling our growth. If we want this kind of growth of our leadership and our depth, we need to consciously create relationships in which we choose into allowing and sharing our impact on each other. How to see through the illusion of doing vulnerability. As Adam and I were realizing, any time that we're thinking, hey, look at me being vulnerable over here, we're almost certainly not being that. When we're being truly vulnerable, our attention is usually on the fear or the discomfort that it typically entails. I love the idea of discovery. Instead of knowing the answers or saying, yep, this is how I typically am, discovery is about being in an active, in-life discovery of how we're showing up, where our edges are, and where we fall down. If you'd like to get the notes and get links for everything we spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes at primalhappiness.co/episode 260. And if you're feeling ready to go deeper with myself and Jonathan to reclaim your primal power and actualize your deepest gifts, go to primalhappiness.co/go deeper, or you can book a free exploration call with one of us at primalhappiness.co/exploration. If you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice and hit subscribe. That way you'll get each episode delivered straight to your device as soon as it's released. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.